Hi, my name's Ellie. I'm in my third year at ULIP, and today we're going to talk to you about accommodation, and I'm going to share some tips and advice on my own experience. Firstly, you want to ask yourself where you want to live in Paris, and a good way to do this is to familiarise yourself with a map of Paris. So Paris is made up of 20 arrondissements, which are put into 6 sections. You have the south, the Latin Quarter, the southwest, the historic, the northwest and the northeast. Typically the more central parts of Paris are more dense, they're more touristy because they have more of the landmarks, therefore they are a little bit more expensive to live in, whereas when you move to the outer sort of arrondissements, it becomes a lot quieter, it's less lively, more residential, but you tend to get a better price range. I live in the 15th arrondissement, which I really like because I can walk to university in about 25 minutes. I'm also only 15 minutes on the metro away. It's quite residential, but I feel really safe there, especially living on my own. It's still got quite a nice buzz as well. It's quite a community family feel. But then in comparison, in my first year I lived in the 5th arrondissement, which is obviously a lot more central, it's a lot more touristy and a bit more studenty with like a lot of bars going on. So they're both very different. The 5th was a lot more livelier, but for my third year of university, the 15th is a lot better. So once you've familiarised yourself with the city, it's really important that you decide on your priorities and find out where you personally fit in. So sometimes you're going to have to make a compromise in order to find something that suits you but also fits your budget. So for some students, living more central is more important, so they'll pay a little bit extra and be closer to university, but then for others, living further out is absolutely fine and they're okay with a longer commute. For me personally, I live in the 15th, which borders the 7th, so I'm very, very central, very, very close to university, but my compromise is that I'm in a very, very small apartment, but then my priority for me was that I'm in a more central place, so that works for me. So the next thing you need to think about is how much you can afford to be spending on your accommodation per month. So this depends on a lot of things. It depends on how much student loan you get, how much your parents are going to be able to support you, and whether you're going to be working out here as well. You also need to take into consideration that when you move out here, there could be quite a few startup costs. So for example, if you go through an agency, you usually have to pay a deposit, which can be 1 to 2 months rent, agency fees, and then of course your first month's rent. So a good way to avoid agency fees is either joining the ULIP Facebook group and finding flats from previous students who have maybe gone through private landlords who don't go through an agency, or even going through Airbnb and privately contacting the landlord themselves, and they usually don't do an agency fee there. It's also worth knowing that we receive CAF, which is a French housing benefit for students. Now this ranges between 100 to 200 euro a month, depending on your housing situation, whether you live on your own, where you live, how big it is, etc. And this is a grant, so it's money that you don't pay back, but you do have to bear in mind that it does take a while to set up. You do have to keep the application updated every time you move so that they can reassess you, but it's definitely worth doing. Based on a survey we carried out earlier this year, we can see that amongst our ULIP students there's quite a range of prices that we all pay for accommodation. A good share of our students pay 600 euros or less per month, but then a lot of these are either living out in the suburbs, they've got quite small apartments, or they are working for their rent, so maybe doing babysitting in exchange for like a chambre de bonne type setup. So it's quite difficult to give an actual average because we have such a range of people living in all sorts of different accommodation. I'm very lucky this year in that I've secured a flat for only 400 euros a month. However, this is an exception because my past 2 years I've paid 800 and 780. In addition to your rent, you also need to think about how much your life is going to cost you in Paris. So I would say on average a month I spend about 200 euro on my food shopping. My monthly travel card costs me 38 euro, which is the student metro card. I spend about 40 euro a month on bills, which includes my French phone bill, 27 euro on my gym membership, And then in terms of going out and about in Paris, I'd say a night out could range from about €20 to 50, €60, depending on if you start at a university event, or if you start at a friend's house, or whether you just go full on out. And then in terms of going back to the UK, if you book like in advance, you can get Eurostars really well priced, as well as flights. For me to go back to Bristol Airport, I can do a round trip in about £80 if I book in advance. Okay, so the next step is you need to explore your options. There's quite a few options available in Paris in terms of accommodation, but the most frequent at ULIP seem to be flat sharing or living on your own in a studio or a chambre de bonne. Halls aren't very common in central Paris, however, ULIP are working on setting up a partnership with Nexity, which is a halls in Paris, so it could well change. This year I live on my own in a chambre de bonne, which I really like because I have a lot of independence and my own sort of space. But you do have to bear in mind that sometimes it can get quite lonely. A good thing I would say about living on your own though, and sort of trying not to feel lonely, is it does force you to get out of the house. It does force you to go into university and get out and see friends and do things. I lived in a flat share for my first 2 years at ULIP and I really enjoyed it. It's really nice to share with someone else. There's always someone there for a chat and you're sort of doing the whole Paris experience together. But you do need to obviously choose your flatmates carefully, especially in your first year when you don't know anyone. And my tip would be to maybe just stick with one person, because in my experience, finding flats for more than 2 people in central Paris is just very difficult. In addition to flat sharing or living on your own, a lot of ULIP people do tend to work for their rent or live with a French family. So a lot of my friends babysit for a family, and then in exchange of the work, they get a flat. And this is a really good way of integrating yourself into like a French family and French culture, improving your French massively, and also saving money on rent. The last and the least common option for ULIPers is the Cité Universitaire, which is normally only for postgraduate students, and you do have to apply really early for it. There are also student houses called foyer. Sometimes the meals are included, but you do have to apply early again, and there can be quite a few house rules which could be a little bit strict. Once you have your conditional offer, it's a really good time to start doing some research, exploring your options and thinking about your costs. Make sure you make the most of the JDR in March, and also join our ULIP Prospective Students Facebook group, where you can talk to current students and prospective students about their options, and maybe even look to find people to share flats with. Some students find flats online which have been passed down from previous students, and it's a good idea to come over and see if you can view some of these places yourself. As well, a lot of people decide to rent an Airbnb for their first month in Paris, so that they can come over, they can start university, meet new people, and at the same time look for a more permanent fixture. So most of the resources for finding accommodation we've already mentioned in this video. However, I just wanted to remind you of the most important ones. So firstly, current students, get on the student Facebook group, because we're always leaving flats and we'll always post them and then pass them down to you guys. There's a number of useful websites in the ULIP accommodation guide that you can use, including Central Paris Rentals, which is very popular among ULIP students, PAP and Imogen. And lastly, student services are always there to help, and they do get sent flats from landlords directly, so it's always good to check in with them. So just to recap, we've talked about areas in Paris, the various ways that you can find accommodation, when to start looking, and where you can find more information on this. So hopefully now you have a clearer idea of how to start your new adventure in Paris.